she laughed first. Loud, sharp enough to cut through the music and the clinking glasses. "Gold digger," my fiancé's ex said, lifting her champagne like she'd just made a joke everyone should applaud. And what broke me wasn't the word, it was the silence that followed. The way every single person at my own engagement party turned to look at me, like maybe she was right, like maybe I didn't belong there at all. And then I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, anything, and he didn't. If this story speaks to your heart, only then take a second to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from, your city, your country, and what time it is for you right now, because I'm telling you this exactly how it happened, and maybe somewhere out there someone else needs to hear it too. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and this was the night my engagement turned into something I never saw coming. It started 3 hours earlier, at exactly 6:15 p.m., when I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Daniel's downtown Boston penthouse, staring at myself in a navy silk dress I'd spent 2 weeks convincing myself I deserved to wear. The skyline stretched behind me, glass towers, blinking red lights, the Charles River reflecting the last of the sunset, and for a moment, I actually believed I had made it. Not in the way Vanessa would later accuse me of, not because of Daniel's money, but because after everything I'd built on my own, after years of law school, sleepless nights, and taking cases no one else wanted, I had finally allowed myself to be happy. Daniel walked in around 6:22, adjusting his cufflinks, that same effortless confidence that had drawn me in from the beginning, and he smiled at me like everything was perfect. "You look incredible," he said, kissing my cheek, and I remember thinking his voice sounded just a little too practiced, like he'd said it in his head before walking in. I ignored it. I ignored a lot of things back then. By 7:00 p.m., the party was in full swing. His parents had arrived first, his mother in a pearl white suit that probably cost more than my first year's salary, his father shaking hands with people, like he was hosting a corporate merger instead of his son's engagement. Then came the friends, then the colleagues, then people I didn't even recognize, all filling the penthouse with laughter that felt just a little too loud, conversations that paused just a second too long when I walked past. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just nervous, that this was what stepping into Daniel's world felt like. At 2:43 p.m., I stepped onto the balcony for air, the cool Boston breeze brushing against my skin, and for a moment everything went quiet. Below me, the city moved like it always did, cars, lights, people who had no idea that inside that building my entire life was about to shift. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, just the time staring back at me. 7:43. I didn't know then that it would be the last moment of peace I'd have that night. When I walked back inside, that's when I saw her. Vanessa Cole, standing near the bar like she owned the room, her red dress catching the light, her hand resting casually on the marble counter as she laughed at something Daniel had just said. My stomach dropped. I hadn't been told she would be there. Not once, not even hinted. And the way Daniel stood there, not surprised, not uncomfortable, just normal, told me everything I needed to know. He knew. Of course he knew. I walked toward them slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last, the sound of my heels barely cutting through the music. Vanessa saw me first. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. "Emily," she said, dragging my name just enough to make it feel like something else entirely. "I was wondering when you'd come say hello." Daniel cleared his throat, finally stepping slightly to the side, but still not quite between us. "Vanessa just stopped by," he said, like that explained anything, like that made sense. I nodded. Of course she did. Of course, she just happened to stop by an invitation-only engagement party on the 42nd floor of a private building. "Congratulations," Vanessa added, lifting her glass toward me, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, slow, deliberate, calculating. "You must be very proud of yourself." I felt it then. Not just tension, not just discomfort, something else, something underneath all of it, like I was standing in the middle of a room where everyone already knew something I didn't. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were starting to tremble. She tilted her head, smile widening just a fraction. "Landing Daniel Brooks isn't exactly easy," she said. "Takes strategy." A few people nearby chuckled softly. Not loud, not obvious, But enough. Just enough. I looked at Daniel again. Waiting. Still waiting. He took a sip of his drink, said nothing. And that's when she said it. The word that echoed louder than the music, louder than the laughter, louder than anything else in that room, gold digger. She said it casually, like it was obvious, like it was already agreed upon. And just like that, the room shifted. Conversations slowed, heads turned, eyes locked onto me. And in that exact moment, standing in a room full of people who suddenly saw me as something I wasn't, I realized something even worse. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't just an ex causing drama. This had been building, planned, set up, and I was walking straight into it without even knowing. I did not speak. Not right away. My ears were ringing, my chest tight, like the air in that room had suddenly been pulled out from around me, and all I could hear was the echo of that word repeating in my head while dozens of eyes studied me like I was something they needed to figure out, something suspicious, something temporary. Vanessa took a slow sip of her champagne, watching me over the rim of the glass, completely at ease, like she had just said something everyone had already been thinking. I glanced around, hoping, stupidly, that someone would laugh it off, that someone would say she had gone too far, but no one did. Daniel still said nothing. His silence was louder than anything she could have said. I felt my fingers curl slightly at my sides, nails pressing into my palms, grounding me, reminding me to stay still, to stay controlled, because something deep in my gut was telling me this was not just an insult. This was a setup. "That is not funny," I said finally, my voice calm, quieter than I expected, but steady. Vanessa smiled wider, like she had been waiting for me to respond. "Oh, I am not joking," she said. "I mean, come on. You show up out of nowhere, no family connections, no real background anyone here knows, and suddenly you are engaged to one of the most well-connected men in Boston? That is impressive. Strategic, even." A few more soft laughs. Someone whispered behind me. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I could feel it. The shift, the judgment. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, still avoiding my eyes. "Vanessa, that is enough," he said, but there was no real force behind it, no conviction, nothing that would actually stop her. It sounded like something he said because he knew he should, not because he meant it. And that was the moment something inside me changed. Not broke, changed. Because up until then, I had been hoping he would step in, that he would draw a line, that he would make it clear that I was not alone in that room. But he did not. And once I accepted that, everything became clearer. Vanessa set her glass down gently on the counter and took a small step closer to me, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel more personal, more cutting. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think you are smart. I think you saw an opportunity, and you took it, and honestly, good for you. Just do not pretend it is love." That word hit differently, love. Because for a second, I remembered every late night, every conversation, every moment where I thought Daniel and I were building something real, something honest. And standing there with his ex dissecting me in front of everyone and him barely holding the line, I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You are wrong," I said, simple, direct, no emotion. Vanessa tilted her head again, studying me like I had just confirmed something for her instead of challenging it. "Am I?" she asked softly. "Then why does no one here know anything about you?" That question landed harder than the accusation, because it was not entirely untrue. I had kept parts of my life private, not out of shame, out of necessity, out of habit. And suddenly that privacy was being twisted into something else entirely. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Daniel's mother stepped forward. "Emily," she said, her tone polite but distant, the kind of politeness that felt colder than anger. "Perhaps this is not the time for misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was not confused. She was choosing a side, and it was not mine. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, keeping my expression neutral. "There is no misunderstanding," I said. "I am exactly who I say I am." Vanessa let out a soft laugh again, shaking her head slightly. "That is exactly the problem," she said. "No one knows what that is." The words lingered in the air, heavy, deliberate, and for a brief moment I considered walking out, just turning around, leaving the penthouse, leaving the noise, leaving all of them behind and never looking back. it would have been easier, cleaner. But then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Near the far end of the room, just past the dining area, there was a man standing quietly, slightly apart from the crowd. Older, gray hair, dark suit. He had been there earlier. I remembered seeing him when the party started, but I had not paid much attention at the time. Now he was watching. Not the way everyone else was watching me, not with curiosity or judgment, but with focus, intent, like he was waiting for something. For a second, our eyes met, and something about the way he held that gaze made my stomach tighten. Not fear, recognition. Not of him, but of what that kind of presence meant. He did not belong to the noise of the party. He was observing it, processing it. I looked away first, my mind racing, trying to place him, trying to understand why he felt familiar even though I could not immediately remember where I had seen him before. Behind me, Vanessa was still speaking, her voice blending into the background now, just noise, because something else had taken over my attention. Something bigger than her, something bigger than this moment. "Emily?" Daniel said quietly, finally stepping closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Maybe we should just calm things down." Calm things down. I turned to look at him slowly, really look at him, at the man I had agreed to marry, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Not confusion, not surprise, but calculation. Like he was measuring the situation, deciding how to handle it, how to protect himself, not me. And that was when I knew. This was not just Vanessa trying to humiliate me. This was something else, something planned, something coordinated, and I had just walked straight into it. I exhaled slowly, my pulse steadying, my thoughts sharpening, because if they thought they had control of this situation, if they thought they understood who I was and what I would do, they were about to find out how wrong they were. And just as that realization settled in, I heard a chair scrape softly against the floor behind me. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but in that moment it cut through everything like a blade. A chair shifting, a deliberate movement, the kind that does not happen by accident. Conversations did not stop all at once, but they began to falter, one by one, like a ripple moving across the room. I did not turn immediately. I did not rush. Instead, I let the silence build, let the tension stretch, because something deep inside me already knew exactly who it was. The man I had noticed earlier, the one who did not belong to the noise. I turned slowly, my eyes finding him again as he stepped forward, adjusting his jacket with a calm, unhurried precision. He was older, late 60s maybe, his posture straight, his expression composed, but there was weight to his presence, the kind that does not need to announce itself, the kind people recognize even before they understand why. A few guests near him stepped aside instinctively, creating space without being asked, as if some unspoken rule had just been triggered. I heard someone behind me whisper his name, barely audible but enough. "Whitman." The word landed quietly, but it spread. You could feel it, the shift. Vanessa's voice, which had been so confident just seconds ago, faltered mid-sentence. She followed my gaze, her smile tightening slightly as she noticed the change in the room. Daniel straightened beside me, his body language shifting in a way I had not seen all night, more alert now, more cautious. And then the man walked forward, not toward the bar, not toward Daniel, toward me, each step measured, controlled, the sound of his shoes against the hardwood floor echoing just enough to draw every eye in the room. I felt my heartbeat slow, not speed up, not panic, just steady, focused. Because now it made sense. Everything about him, the way he had been watching, the way he carried himself. The familiarity I could not place before. It was not personal recognition, it was professional. He stopped about 2 feet in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the calm intelligence behind them, and for a brief moment neither of us spoke. The room held its breath. Then he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect so subtle most people would have missed it, but not me, never me. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice clear even, carrying just enough authority to silence the last of the whispers. And just like that, everything changed. I did not react outwardly. I did not smile. I did not step forward. But inside, something locked into place. Around us, the energy shifted completely. The same people who had been watching me with suspicion just moments ago were now watching him, trying to understand, trying to connect the dots, trying to reconcile what they thought they knew with what they were seeing. Vanessa's confusion was immediate. I could feel it without even looking at her. But I did look. Slowly, deliberately. Her expression had lost its edge, replaced with something else. Uncertainty. She glanced between me and him, her confidence slipping just enough to be noticeable. "I am sorry," she said, forcing a small laugh, trying to recover. "Do you two know each other?" The question hung in the air, fragile, like it might break if anyone answered it too directly. The man did not look at her, not even for a second. His attention remained on me, steady, unwavering, as if the rest of the room had ceased to exist. "We have met," he said calmly. Simple, controlled. But the way he said it carried more weight than any explanation could have. Daniel shifted beside me again, stepping slightly closer, his voice low, uncertain now in a way it had not been before. "Emily?" he said, like he was asking a question he was not sure he wanted answered. I turned my head just enough to look at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since everything had started, and I saw it clearly now. Not control, not calculation, concern, real concern. And underneath it, fear. "You did not mention you knew Judge Whitman," he added, his voice tightening slightly as he said the name out loud, like saying it made the situation more real, more dangerous. Judge Whitman, there it was, the piece everyone needed. The title that carried meaning far beyond this room. A judge did not stand up like that for nothing. A judge did not cross a room for someone insignificant. And now they all knew it. I let the silence stretch for just a moment longer, letting them sit with it, letting the realization settle in, not rushing to fill the space, because this was the first time all night that I had control of the narrative, and I was not going to waste it. "There are many things you did not ask," I said quietly, my voice calm, steady, the same tone I used in a courtroom when I already knew the outcome. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to speak, to regain ground, but nothing came out. For the first time since she had arrived, she did not have the next move. Daniel's mother, who had been so composed earlier, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between me and the judge, recalculating, reassessing, adjusting her understanding of who I was in real time. The room was no longer on Vanessa's side. It was no longer against me. It was waiting, waiting for something to be revealed, waiting for the truth to take shape. Judge Whitman's gaze softened slightly, just enough to signal something unspoken, something professional, something that connected us beyond this moment, beyond this party. "I did not realize you would be here tonight," he said, a simple sentence. But the implications rippled outward instantly, because if he had not expected to see me here, then what had he expected? And why did that matter? Daniel frowned slightly, his mind racing, trying to catch up, trying to understand what he had missed, what he had overlooked. "Emily?" he said again, more firmly this time. "What is going on?" I held his gaze for a second longer, then looked back at the judge, because the truth was, this moment was no longer about explaining myself. It was about revealing something much bigger, something they had not even considered, something they had tried very hard to keep hidden. And just as the weight of that realization began to settle across the room, I took a slow breath and spoke, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. "I think," I said, "it is time we stop pretending this is just a party." And the look that passed between me and the judge in that moment said everything no one else in that room was ready to hear. The words settled into the room like a quiet shockwave, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough that no one dared interrupt them, and for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to decide what came next, but no one did. Because for the first time that night, the control had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it even if they did not understand it yet. Daniel's hand brushed lightly against my arm, not possessive, not reassuring, just uncertain, like he was trying to anchor himself to something stable, something familiar. But I stepped slightly away, not enough to make a scene, just enough to make a point, and I saw the flicker of realization cross his face as he understood that whatever this was, whatever was happening in this moment, he was no longer in control of it. Vanessa let out a soft, nervous laugh that did not quite land the way she intended, her eyes darting briefly toward the people around her, searching for support that was no longer there. "I think we are all getting a little dramatic," she said, her voice tighter now, less certain. "It is just a party. There is no need to turn this into something else." But even as she said it, she knew it was already too late, because the room had already shifted, the energy had already changed, and everyone was watching, waiting, expecting something to unfold. Judge Whitman remained exactly where he was, his posture unchanged, his expression calm. But there was something in his gaze now, something deliberate, like he was measuring the moment, allowing it to develop naturally, not rushing, not interfering, just observing the way someone does when they already know how things are going to end. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch just a little longer, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, not shrinking from it this time, not trying to disappear, but standing fully in it, because I knew something they did not, something they had underestimated, something they had counted on me never revealing. "You are right," I said finally, my voice even, controlled, directed at Vanessa but meant for everyone. "It is not just a party," and I let the words settle before continuing. "And it is not just about what you said." Vanessa's smile faltered completely now, her confidence unraveling thread by thread as she tried to keep up, to adjust, to find her footing again, but the ground beneath her was already shifting. Daniel frowned, stepping forward again, more assertive this time, but still cautious. "Emily, if there is something you need to say, we can talk about it privately," he said, emphasizing the last word, like he was trying to contain the situation, to pull it back into something manageable, something controlled. But I shook my head slightly, a small movement that carried more weight than any argument. "No," I said quietly, "we cannot." And that single word landed harder than anything else I had said so far, because it removed the option of retreat, the illusion of privacy, the safety of keeping things hidden. His mother shifted again, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the tension underneath. "Emily, this is not appropriate," she said, her tone sharper now, less polite, more defensive, and I turned to look at her, meeting her gaze fully, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something steadier, something colder. "Neither is accusing someone of something you already know is not true," I replied, and that was when the first real crack appeared, not in Vanessa, not in Daniel, but in the entire structure of what they had built around this moment, because that sentence carried implication, intention, knowledge. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression shifting from defensive to calculating again, like she was trying to regain control by reframing the situation. "What exactly are you implying?" she asked, her voice lower now, more careful, and I held her gaze for a second, then let it move slowly across the room, taking in the faces, the curiosity, the uncertainty, the growing unease, because this was no longer just about her, or Daniel, or even me. This was about something much larger that had been hidden in plain sight. "I am not implying anything," I said calmly. "I am stating that you are very confident for someone who should be asking a lot more questions right now." The words landed softly, but the meaning behind them was unmistakable, and I saw it register, not just with her, but with others in the room. The subtle shift from judgment to doubt, from assumption to suspicion. Daniel stepped in front of me slightly now, not blocking me, but positioning himself between me and the rest of the room, his voice lower, more urgent. "Emily, you are not making any sense," he said. But there was a crack in it now, a hint of something he could not quite control, and I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the layers I had missed before, the careful presentation, the charm, the ease, and underneath it, something else, something that did not belong in a moment like this. "That is because you never asked the right questions," I said, and for a brief second, I saw something flash in his eyes, not confusion, not annoyance, but recognition, like a part of him understood exactly what I meant, even if he did not want to admit it. Behind him, Judge Whitman finally moved again, just a small step forward, enough to signal that this was no longer just an exchange between people at a party, but something else entirely, something that carried weight beyond the room, beyond the evening, beyond the relationships everyone thought they understood. "Miss Carter," he said again, his voice steady, composed, but with a slight shift in tone now, something more formal, more deliberate. If you believe there is something that needs to be addressed, I suggest you do so clearly." And the room went still, completely still, because that was not a casual statement. That was not a polite suggestion. That was an invitation. And more importantly, it was a signal, one that anyone paying attention would recognize. I nodded once, slowly, acknowledging him, acknowledging the moment, and then I looked back at Daniel, at Vanessa, at the people who had just minutes ago been so certain of who I was and what I represented, and I realized something with absolute clarity. They had built this entire narrative around me, without ever asking who I actually was, without ever considering that there might be more beneath the surface, more behind the silence, more behind the restraint. "You wanted to know why no one here knows anything about me," I said, my voice calm, controlled, but carrying just enough weight to hold the room in place. "The truth is, you were never supposed to." And that was when the tension shifted again, sharper this time, more focused, more dangerous. Because now it was no longer just curiosity driving the room. It was realization, the slow, creeping understanding that something had been hidden in plain sight all along, and they were only just beginning to see it. The words did not explode. They did not shock the room all at once. They settled in slowly, like something heavy sinking beneath the surface, and I could see it happening in real time. The way people's expressions shifted from curiosity to unease, from unease to something sharper, something closer to concern, because they were beginning to understand that this was not just a misunderstanding, not just a social misstep, but something deliberate, something constructed, something that had been unfolding long before tonight. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes searching mine, not with anger, not even with frustration, but with something much more dangerous, something that told me he was starting to connect pieces he did not want to see connected. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly, his voice controlled but strained, and I held his gaze for a moment, letting him sit with the question before I answered, because this was no longer about reacting. This was about revealing, step by step, exactly how wrong they had been about me. "It means," I said slowly, choosing each word with precision, "that I did not come into your life by accident." And I watched the reaction ripple outward instantly, subtle but unmistakable. Vanessa's posture stiffening, Daniel's mother drawing in a sharp breath, someone near the back shifting uncomfortably, because that sentence alone carried implication far beyond anything they had expected. Vanessa recovered first, of course she did, her expression snapping back into something sharper, more defensive, like she had found a new angle to attack. "Oh, so now you are admitting it?" she said quickly, her voice rising just enough to reclaim attention. "You planned this? You targeted him?" But I shook my head once, calmly, because she was still thinking too small, still trying to fit this into a narrative she understood, and that was her mistake. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I am saying that you have all been asking the wrong question from the beginning." And I let that sit, just long enough for the silence to stretch again, for the tension to tighten, for the room to lean in without realizing it. Judge Whitman remained still beside me, his presence grounding the moment, reinforcing it, not interrupting, not correcting, just allowing the truth to unfold at its own pace, and that alone told everyone paying attention that this was not speculation, this was not drama, this was something real. Daniel stepped closer again, his voice lower now, almost urgent. "Emily, stop," he said under his breath, like he was trying to contain something he could feel slipping out of his control. "Whatever this is, we can fix it, just do not do this here." And I felt a brief flicker of something, not doubt, not hesitation, but clarity, because that sentence told me everything I needed to know about him, about how he saw the situation, about what he thought this was really about. "Fix it?" I repeated softly, and for the first time, there was the faintest edge in my tone, not anger, but something colder, something sharper. "You think this is something you can fix?" He did not answer immediately, and that silence was answer enough. Behind him, Vanessa crossed her arms, her confidence returning in fragments. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "You are trying to turn this into something bigger than it is, but everyone here can see what is happening. You are scrambling because you got called out." But even as she said it, her eyes flicked again toward Judge Whitman, toward the shift she could not explain, toward the authority she could not dismiss, and I saw it then, the first real crack in her certainty. "No," I said quietly, "I am not scrambling." And I let my gaze move across the room again, slower this time, deliberate, taking in every face, every reaction, every shift in posture and expression, because they needed to see it, they needed to feel it, not just hear it. I am giving you all a chance to understand what you are actually standing in the middle of, and that sentence changed something, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that the room leaned even further into the moment, the curiosity deepening into something more serious, more cautious. Daniel's father spoke for the first time, his voice firm but measured, the tone of someone used to control, to authority, to command. "Emily," he said, stepping forward slightly, "if there is something you need to say it clearly." And I turned to him, meeting his gaze without hesitation, because this was the moment where everything shifted from implication to reality. "I will," I said, and then I paused, just long enough for the silence to sharpen, for the anticipation to build, for every person in that room to realize that whatever came next was not going to be small, not going to be contained, not going to be ignored. I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately, not rushing, not dramatizing the movement, just letting it happen in a way that drew attention without demanding it. And I could feel it, the collective focus narrowing, the room holding its breath again, because they all knew, instinctively, that this was the moment something would be revealed. Daniel's voice cut in, sharper now. "Emily, what are you doing?" But I did not answer him. Not yet, because this was no longer about his comfort, his control, his version of events. This was about the truth, and the truth does not ask for permission. I pulled out a thin, dark folder, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just a simple professional document holder, and I held it in my hand for a moment before looking up again, meeting Daniel's eyes one last time before everything changed. "You said no one here knows anything about me," I said, my voice steady, grounded, carrying across the room without effort. "That is because everything about me that matters was never meant for rooms like this." And I saw it then, the exact moment it landed, not just with him, not just with Vanessa, but with everyone. The realization that this was not a performance, not a reaction, but something that had been building, something that had been waiting, something that had chosen this exact moment to come to the surface. Judge Whitman's voice followed, calm, precise, unmistakably authoritative. "Miss Carter," he said, "if you are prepared, I believe now would be an appropriate time." And that was it, the final shift, the line that separated everything that had come before from everything that was about to happen, because when a judge says something like that in a room like this, it is not a suggestion, it is confirmation. I nodded once, slowly, my fingers tightening slightly around the folder, not from fear, not from hesitation, but from the weight of what it represented, because what was inside it was not just information, not just evidence, it was the truth, the kind of truth that does not just change a moment, it changes everything that comes after it. And as I looked back up, meeting the eyes of the people who had just minutes ago reduced me to something small, something simple, something they thought they understood, I realized something with absolute clarity. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they had been, and there was no way to stop it now. I opened the folder slowly, not to create drama, not to draw attention, but because moments like this demand precision, and I could feel every set of eyes in the room locked onto my hands, watching, waiting, trying to anticipate what they thought they already understood, but none of them did. The soft sound of the paper shifting inside the folder seemed louder than it should have been, cutting through the silence, anchoring the moment in something real, something tangible, something they could no longer dismiss as speculation or emotion. Daniel took a step closer, his voice tight, controlled, but edged with something that had not been there before. "Emily, stop this," he said, low enough that it almost sounded like a warning, but I did not look at him, not yet, because I knew if I did, I might see something that would complicate what needed to be done, and this was not the moment for hesitation. Instead, I pulled out the first document and held it lightly between my fingers, not displaying it fully, just enough to make it clear that this was not empty, that this was not a bluff. "You all assume something tonight," I said, my voice steady, calm, carrying across the room without effort. "You assumed that I was here because of him." I tilted my head slightly toward Daniel without looking at him directly. "That I needed something from him, that I was building my life around his," and I let that settle, Let them sit with the assumption they had so quickly accepted, because it was important for them to recognize it before it was dismantled. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter now, her posture defensive, but her eyes sharper, searching, calculating, trying to find the angle she could still control. "Then what is this?" she asked, her voice lower, less performative now, more cautious. "What are you trying to prove?" I finally looked at her, meeting her gaze fully, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. "I am not trying to prove anything," I said. "I am correcting something." And that distinction mattered more than any explanation. A murmur moved quietly through the room, not loud enough to disrupt, but enough to signal that the balance had shifted again, that people were no longer simply observing, they were reassessing, rethinking, recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Daniel's mother stepped forward slightly, her composure strained now, her voice sharper than before. "Emily, if this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can resolve it privately," she said. But there was something in her tone now that betrayed uncertainty, a subtle shift from authority to concern, and I shook my head once, gently, not dismissing her, but not agreeing either. "It is not a misunderstanding," I replied, and then I lifted the document just enough for the closest people to see the header, the formal formatting, the unmistakable structure of something official, something legal, something that carried weight beyond personal conflict. Daniel's father leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read it from where he stood, and I saw the moment it registered, not fully, not completely, but enough to recognize the type of document, enough to understand that this was not personal, this was procedural, this was serious. "This is a financial compliance report," I said calmly, "one that has been under review for the past 6 months." And the words landed differently than anything else I had said so far, because they were specific, because they carried context, because they introduced something none of them had expected to hear in this room at this moment. Daniel froze beside me, not dramatically, not obviously, but I felt it, the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his shoulders, the way his breath changed just slightly, and that told me everything I needed to know, not about what he would say, but about what he already understood. Vanessa blinked, her confidence faltering for the first time in a way she could not hide. "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before, and I turned slightly, angling the document just enough that Judge Whitman could see it clearly, not because he needed to, but because the gesture itself carried meaning, reinforced context, confirmed that this was not a performance, this was something that existed beyond this room. "It has everything to do with this," I said, my voice steady, controlled, "because the person you all think I am does not exist." And that sentence shifted the energy again, sharper this time, more focused, more intense, because now it was not just about what I was revealing, it was about what they had misunderstood from the very beginning. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice lower, tighter. "Emily, what are you saying?" And I turned to him fully now, meeting his eyes, holding his gaze without hesitation, because this was the moment where the truth stopped being abstract and became real. "I am saying," I replied slowly, "that I am not here because of you." And I let the silence stretch just long enough for that to sink in before continuing. "I am here because of what you are connected to," and that was the line that changed everything, the one that separated assumption from reality. The one that forced every person in that room to reconsider not just me, but him, his position, his relationships, his standing. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but undeniable. The shift from judgment to suspicion, now directed away from me and towards something else. Something they had not considered, something they had not questioned. Vanessa's expression hardened again, but it was different now, less confident, more defensive. "That is ridiculous," she said quickly. "You are trying to twist this into something it is not." But even as she spoke, her eyes flicked again to the document, to the judge, to the tension she could not explain away. "No," I said quietly. "I am showing you what it has always been." And then I took a small step forward, closing the distance between myself and Daniel, just enough that my voice could remain calm, controlled, private enough for him to hear clearly, but still carry weight for those closest to us. "You should have asked more questions," I said, not accusing, not angry, just stating a fact, and the look in his eyes shifted again, deeper this time, more complex. Because now he understood that this was not just about perception, this was about reality, and reality does not bend to comfort. Judge Whitman's voice followed, calm and deliberate, reinforcing the moment without overpowering it. Miss Carter has been working under a federal compliance review related to financial irregularities connected to multiple entities, he said, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that those closest could hear, clearly enough that the weight of it could begin to spread. And that was it, the final confirmation, the point where speculation ended and truth began. The room did not erupt, it did not react all at once, but it shifted, profoundly. The kind of shift that happens when people realize they have been standing in the middle of something much larger than they understood. Something that changes the context of everything that came before it. I lowered the document slightly, my grip steady, my expression calm. Because this was not about winning, not about proving anyone wrong. This was about correcting the narrative that had been built around me without my consent, without my participation, without my truth. And as I looked around the room, at the faces that had judged me, dismissed me, reduced me to something simple, I realized something with absolute clarity. They were no longer looking at me the same way, and they never would again. But the truth was, this was only the beginning. Because what they had just heard was not the full story, not even close, and the moment they realized that, everything was going to change. The silence that followed was not empty anymore. It was heavy, pressurized. Like the entire room had just been sealed inside a reality no one was prepared for. No one moved at first. No one even reached for their drink. Because what had just been said did not belong at an engagement party. It belonged somewhere else, somewhere serious, somewhere final. Daniel was the first to react, but not the way I expected. He did not deny it. He did not laugh it off. He just stared at me, his expression tightening slowly, like something inside him was recalculating faster than he could control. "That is not possible," he said, but his voice lacked certainty, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. I held his gaze, did not flinch, did not soften. "It is already in process," I said quietly, and I watched the exact moment the weight of that sentence landed on him. His shoulders stiffened, his breathing shifted, subtle, but real. Around us, the murmurs grew louder now, no longer whispers but fragments of confusion, of speculation, of something beginning to unravel. Vanessa stepped forward again, but this time her confidence was fractured, uneven. "This is insane," she said, her voice sharper, almost desperate. "You are standing here making accusations with no context, no proof, just trying to scare people." I did not respond immediately. Instead, I lifted the document slightly higher, not to show everything, just enough for the header to be visible to more people this time, enough for the structure, the formatting, the official seal to speak for itself. "You wanted proof," I said calmly. "You just did not expect it to look like this." Daniel's father stepped closer now, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the tension underneath. "What exactly is being reviewed?" he asked, his tone controlled but firm, the voice of someone used to authority, used to answers. I turned slightly toward him, acknowledging the question, but not rushing to satisfy it. "Multiple financial channels," I said. "Trust allocations, offshore transfers, irregular reporting structures tied to shell entities." Each phrase landed heavier than the last, not because people fully understood them, but because they recognized the language, the seriousness, the implication. Daniel shook his head quickly, stepping forward again, this time placing himself directly in front of me, his voice lower, more intense. "You are making this sound like something criminal," he said. I met his eyes, calm, unmoved. "I am not making it sound like anything," I replied. "I am describing what is being examined." That distinction cut deeper than any accusation. Vanessa's voice came again, faster now, trying to regain control of the narrative before it slipped completely. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Even if any of that were true, which it is not, why would you be involved?" That question. That was the moment everything pivoted again. Because now they were finally asking the right thing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw not arrogance, not confidence, but fear beginning to form behind her eyes. "Because," I said slowly, "this is exactly what I do." The room stilled again. Not the same silence as before, This one was sharper, focused. Like every person in that space was leaning in without realizing it. Daniel blinked once, twice. "What does that mean?" he asked. His voice was no longer steady. I let a small breath out, not from nerves, but from clarity, from finality. "It means," I said, "that I do not represent you. I do not work for your family. I do not benefit from anything connected to you." I paused, let it settle, then I finished. "I investigate structures like yours." The words did not need volume. They did not need emphasis. They landed exactly as they were, direct, precise, unavoidable. Vanessa stepped back this time. Just half a step. But it was enough. Enough for everyone to notice. "No," she said under her breath, shaking her head, like rejecting it could make it untrue. Daniel's mother brought a hand to her chest, her composure cracking in a way that could not be hidden anymore. "That is not possible," she whispered, but Judge Whitman spoke before I could respond, his voice calm, authoritative, final. "It is not only possible," he said, "it is already documented." That sentence changed everything. Not gradually, not subtly, completely. Because now it was no longer just me speaking. It was no longer just implication. It was confirmation. Daniel turned sharply toward the judge, his control finally breaking at the edges. "You knew about this?" he asked. The question was not angry. It was stunned. Judge Whitman held his gaze evenly. "I am aware of the review," he said, "and I am aware of Miss Carter's role in it." The room shifted again, but this time, it did not feel like curiosity. It felt like exposure, like something that had been hidden too long was finally being pulled into the light. I lowered the document slightly, watching them, all of them, process what they had just heard, what they had just misunderstood, what they had just tried to dismiss. And for a moment, no one spoke. No one tried to interrupt, because now they understood something they had not before. This was never about me proving anything. This was never about defending myself. This was about them realizing they had been completely wrong from the start. And the worst part? I had not even shown them everything yet. The silence did not break this time. It deepened. It stretched across the room like something fragile and irreversible, and I could see it in their faces, the shift from confusion to realization, from realization to something much harder to hide, because now it was no longer about misunderstanding me. It was about understanding what they were standing inside of, and more importantly, what they might be connected to. Daniel did not move for a few seconds, not even a small adjustment, just standing there as if his entire sense of control had been quietly pulled out from under him, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of confidence, stripped of ease. "You are saying I am under investigation?" he asked, not loudly, not accusing, but carefully, like the wording mattered now, like every word could carry consequences. I did not answer immediately, not because I did not know what to say, but because this was not a question that deserved a simple response, and more importantly, it was not one I was allowed to answer the way he wanted. "I am saying," I replied slowly, meeting his eyes, "that structures connected to you are being reviewed," and I watched the distinction land, subtle but precise, because he understood the difference. He understood exactly what that meant, and that was enough. Vanessa shook her head again, faster now, her voice cutting in before the silence could settle. "No, this is not real. This is not how this works. You cannot just walk into a private event and start making claims like this." But her tone had lost its sharpness, replaced with something thinner, something more fragile, because she could feel it too, the shift, the authority in the room that she could not override, could not outtalk, could not dismiss. "I did not walk in," I said quietly, turning my gaze toward her. "I was already here." And that sentence carried more weight than it seemed, because it reminded them of something simple and undeniable. This was not an intrusion. This was not a performance. This was something that had been present all along, something they had failed to recognize. Daniel's father stepped forward again, but this time there was no attempt to control the situation, no attempt to steer it back into something manageable, just a direct question. "What exactly are you reviewing?" And I could hear it now, not authority, not command, but concern, real concern. The kind that comes when someone realizes the situation is larger than they anticipated. I adjusted the folder slightly in my hand, not opening it further yet, not revealing everything, because timing mattered, and I needed them to follow the progression, to understand each layer before the next one was exposed. Patterns, I said simply. Financial movement that does not align with declared structures, inconsistencies in reporting, connections between entities that should not exist on paper but do in practice. And as I spoke, I saw it, the subtle reactions, the small shifts in posture, the tightening of expressions, because even if they did not understand every term, they understood the implication. They understood the seriousness. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the pressure building underneath. "You think my family is doing something illegal?" he asked, and this time there was something else in his voice. Not just confusion, but disbelief, like he was standing between two versions of reality and did not know which one to trust. I held his gaze, steady, unwavering. "I do not think," I said. "I verify," and that difference changed everything again, because it removed opinion, removed speculation, replaced it with process, with structure, with something far more dangerous, something far more real. Vanessa let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh, but it did not hold. It collapsed halfway through. "This is unbelievable," she said. "You are standing here acting like you have authority over all of this," and for a moment, I considered responding directly. But instead, I let the silence answer for me, because the authority in the room was not mine alone, and everyone could feel it now. Judge Whitman stepped slightly closer, not in front of me, not taking over, just reinforcing the moment with his presence. And when he spoke, it was not louder than before, but it carried further. "Miss Carter is not acting," he said, his tone calm, precise. "She is operating within a defined capacity," and that was it, the confirmation that could not be argued with, the line that could not be crossed. Daniel turned toward him again, his voice sharper now. "And what capacity is that?" And for the first time, there was a challenge in his tone, not directed at me, but at the situation itself, at the reality unfolding in front of him. I answered before the judge could, not out of defiance, but because this was my moment to define the narrative fully, to remove any remaining doubt. "I am part of a federal review team," I said, my voice calm, grounded, assigned to examine financial irregularities across multiple connected entities, including those tied to your network. And there it was, the full statement, the clarity they had been resisting, the truth they had been circling around without wanting to name. The room did not react immediately, because sometimes the most significant truths do not create noise, they create stillness, the kind that forces people to sit with what they have just heard, to process it, to internalize it. Daniel took a step back this time, not away from me specifically, but away from the center of the moment, like he needed space, like he needed distance from what was being revealed. And that movement alone said more than any denial could have. Vanessa did not speak again right away, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and calculation, like she was trying to find a way out of a situation that no longer had an exit she could control. Daniel's mother looked at him, not at me, not at the judge, but at him, her expression shifting from certainty to something far more fragile, something that asked a question she was not ready to say out loud. And in the middle of all of it, I stood still, grounded, not elevated, not aggressive, just present, because this was not about overpowering them. This was about letting the truth exist in the space where they had tried to reduce me, dismiss me, define me without knowing me. I lowered the folder slightly, my grip steady, my mind clear, because what had been said so far was only the framework, only the beginning. And as I looked around the room one more time, taking in the silence, the tension, the realization settling into every corner of that space, I understood something completely. They were no longer questioning who I was, they were questioning everything else. And the moment that shift happens, there is no going back, only forward, deeper into a truth they were not ready to face. And the worst part for them was, I had only just started to show them how deep it went. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. Not even Vanessa. And that was the first time I truly understood how much the room had shifted, because silence like that does not come from confusion. It comes from recognition, from the slow, unavoidable realization that something real is unfolding, and no one knows how to stop it. Daniel stood there, still, his gaze unfocused for a second, before it snapped back to me, sharper now, more deliberate, like he was trying to find something in my expression that could ground him, something familiar, something he could still control, but there was nothing left for him to hold on to, and I saw it in the way his shoulders squared. Not confidently, but defensively, like someone bracing for impact. "If what you are saying is true," he said slowly, carefully choosing each word, "then you have known about this for a while." And that question, quiet as it was, carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it was no longer about denial, it was about timeline, about intention, about what I knew and when I knew it. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching, because this was not something I needed to soften, not something I could explain away. "Yes," I said simply, and the honesty of it landed harder than anything else, because it confirmed what he had just begun to understand. Vanessa let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but it broke halfway through, her voice slipping into something sharper, more desperate. "So you are admitting it," she said. "You planned all of this. You pretended to be someone else. You got close to him on purpose." But even as she spoke, the room did not follow her this time. No one nodded, no one agreed, because now her words sounded different, smaller, disconnected from the reality that had taken over the space. "I did not pretend," I said calmly, turning toward her. "I chose what to share and what to protect." And that distinction mattered more than anything she was trying to accuse me of, because it reframed the entire situation, not as deception, but as control, as intention, as necessity. Daniel shook his head slightly, running his hand along his jaw, his breathing slower now, more measured, like he was forcing himself to think through the situation instead of reacting to it. "Then why me?" he asked, and there was something in his voice now, something almost vulnerable, like he needed the answer to mean something different than what he was afraid it meant. I paused for just a second, not to hesitate, but to choose how much truth to give him in that moment, because this was not just about the investigation, not just about the structure. This was about him, about us, about everything that had happened between us that now existed in a completely different context. "Because you were already connected," I said, my voice softer now, not weaker, just more precise, because the network we were reviewing intersected with your name, your accounts, your partnerships. And I saw it then, the exact moment it landed, the moment he realized that this had never been random, never been coincidence, never been something that just happened to touch his life. Daniel's father stepped forward again, his expression tighter now, more guarded. "Are you saying my son is involved in something illegal?" he asked, his tone sharper than before. And I turned toward him, meeting his gaze directly, because this was where clarity mattered most, where precision mattered more than anything else. "I am saying his name appears within a structure that is under review," I replied, "and that is exactly why this matters." And I watched the distinction land, subtle but important, because it did not accuse, it did not conclude. It simply stated what was real, what was documented, what was being examined. Vanessa scoffed quietly, but there was no conviction behind it anymore, just a reflex, a habit she had not yet broken. "This is unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "You are turning an engagement party into some kind of investigation?" And I let that sit for a second before responding, because in a way, she was right, just not in the way she thought. "No," I said quietly, "this was already an investigation." And that sentence shifted the energy again, sharper this time, because it reframed the entire night, not as something that had changed, but as something that had been misunderstood from the beginning. Daniel took another step back, his eyes moving briefly toward the guests, toward the room, like he was seeing it differently now, not as a celebration, but as a space filled with witnesses, with people who had just seen something they could not unsee. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice lower, steadier, but carrying something heavier now, something closer to consequence. I looked at him for a long moment, because this was the question that mattered, not the accusations, not the assumptions, but the reality of what came next, and I knew the answer was not simple, not immediate, not something that could be resolved in a single moment. "Now," I said slowly, "everything continues exactly as it was going to." And I saw the confusion flicker across his face, because that was not the answer he expected, not the resolution he was hoping for. "This does not stop anything," I continued. "It does not accelerate anything. It does not change the process. It only changes what you understand about it. And that was the truth. The part people struggle with the most, that the revelation of something does not alter its existence. It only alters perception. Judge Whitman stepped slightly closer again, his presence reinforcing the gravity of the moment without overpowering it. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, deliberate. "Finale, Miss Carter is correct," he said. This process was already in motion. And that confirmation settled over the room like a final weight, something undeniable, something that could not be argued with or dismissed. I lowered the folder slightly, my grip steady, my expression unchanged, because this was no longer about proving anything, no longer about defending myself. It was about letting the truth exist in a space where it had been hidden, ignored, misunderstood. And as I looked at Daniel, at Vanessa, at the people who had just hours ago seen me as something small, something simple, something easy to define, I realized something with complete clarity. They were no longer trying to figure out who I was. They were trying to figure out what this meant for them. And that was a far more complicated question. One that would not be answered tonight, one that would follow them long after this room emptied, long after the music stopped, long after the celebration they thought they were attending had been replaced by something else entirely, something real, something unavoidable, something that had only just begun to reveal itself. The room did not recover. Not after that. Not after the shift had gone too far to reverse. Conversations did not resume, music no longer mattered, and even the soft hum of the city outside felt distant, like everything beyond those walls had stopped existing for a moment, leaving only this space, this truth, this realization hanging in the air. Daniel stood there, still caught between two versions of reality, the one he had lived in and the one now unfolding in front of him, and I could see the exact moment he stopped trying to deny it and started trying to understand it, his posture changing, not collapsing, not retreating, but recalibrating, adjusting to something he could no longer control. "You should have told me," he said finally, his voice lower now, not accusing, not defensive, just searching, like he was trying to find something in the situation that still belonged to him. I held his gaze for a second, steady, grounded, because this was not a moment for softness, not a moment for emotional compromise. "I could not," I said simply, and the honesty of it landed cleanly, without apology, without hesitation, because there are truths that do not bend to relationships, no matter how real they once felt. Vanessa let out a quiet breath behind him, her earlier confidence gone completely now, replaced with something far more uncertain. "So everything was a lie?" she asked, not directly to me, not directly to him, but to the room, to the situation, to whatever version of reality she could still hold on to. I turned slightly, meeting her eyes again, and for the first time, there was no tension in it, no need to defend myself, only clarity. "No," I said, "everything you saw was real. You just did not understand the context." And that distinction mattered more than anything else, because it separated truth from perception, reality from assumption. Daniel's mother shook her head slowly, her voice trembling just enough to betray the composure she had held all evening. "This is not how things are done," she said, almost to herself, like she was trying to anchor the situation back into something familiar, something structured, something controlled, and I understood that instinct, the need to define something by rules that once made sense, but those rules no longer applied here. "This is exactly how things are done," I replied quietly, not to challenge her, but to correct the misunderstanding. "You just have never been on this side of it before." And that sentence shifted something again, not dramatically, but enough to make the reality feel closer, more personal, more immediate. Daniel's father remained silent now, his earlier authority replaced with careful observation, like he was processing every word, every implication, weighing it against something internal, something deeper than what was visible on the surface, and that silence spoke louder than any argument could have. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand dropping from his hair, his gaze settling back on me, steadier now, more focused. "And what about us?" he asked, and this time the question was different, not about the investigation, not about the structure, but about something else, something more human, something that still existed between us despite everything else that had been revealed. I paused for just a moment, not because I did not know the answer, but because this was the only part of the night that carried weight beyond the process, beyond the structure, beyond the investigation. This was personal, and personal truth is rarely simple. "What about us?" I repeated softly, and I let the question sit between us, because the answer was not something I could give him in a single sentence, not something that could be resolved in the middle of a room filled with people who had just witnessed everything shift. Vanessa laughed again, but this time it was hollow, empty, the sound of someone trying to hold on to control when there was none left. "There is no us," she said quickly. "You built everything on deception. There is nothing real here." But no one followed her this time. No one supported the statement, because they had already seen enough to understand that reality was more complicated than that. I looked at Daniel again, not at her, because this was not her moment anymore, not her narrative, not her space to define what we had, I said slowly, was real in the moments it existed. And I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, something that had not disappeared despite everything else, something that made this harder than it needed to be. But it was never built on the same foundation. And that was the truth, the part that mattered most, the part that could not be ignored or reshaped to fit a more comfortable version of events. The room remained still, but the tension had changed. It was no longer sharp, no longer reactive. It had settled into something deeper, something more reflective, because now it was not just about what had happened, it was about what it meant, about what came next, about how everything that had been revealed would reshape everything moving forward. Judge Whitman stepped slightly back this time, not disengaging, not leaving, just allowing the moment to breathe, to unfold without his presence directing it, because this part did not belong to the process. It belonged to us, to the consequences of truth intersecting with something personal. Daniel nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, not in acceptance, but in acknowledgement, like he understood something had ended, or at least changed in a way that could not be undone. "I did not know," he said quietly. And I believed him, not because it changed anything, not because it fixed anything, but because it was true. And sometimes truth exists on both sides of a situation without making it easier. "I know," I replied, and for a brief second, the tension between us softened, not disappeared, just shifted, like two people standing on opposite sides of something they could both see clearly now. Behind us, the room remained silent, watching, processing, absorbing, because what had started as a celebration had become something else entirely, something heavier, something more real, something that would not be forgotten or dismissed once the night ended. I closed the folder slowly, not because the information was no longer relevant, but because everything that needed to be said for now had already been said. And I realized something in that moment with absolute clarity. This was no longer about proving anything, no longer about correcting assumptions. It was about what came next, about how this truth would continue beyond this room, beyond this night, into consequences that had not yet fully revealed themselves. And as I looked around one final time, at the faces that had judged me, dismissed me, and misunderstood me, I saw something new there. Not certainty, not confidence, but awareness, the kind that changes how people see everything moving forward. And I knew without question that whatever happened after tonight, none of them would ever see me the same way again. And more importantly, they would never see themselves the same way either. No one tried to stop me when I stepped back. Not Daniel, not his parents, not even Vanessa. And that, more than anything, told me how completely the power in the room had shifted. Because just an hour ago, I was the outsider, the one being questioned, judged, reduced to something small, and now no one dared interrupt me. No one dared challenge what had already been set into motion. I placed the folder gently against the marble counter beside me, not as a gesture of finality, but as a signal, something quiet but unmistakable, that I was no longer holding anything back, and that whatever came next would not be controlled by assumptions or appearances. Daniel watched me closely, his expression no longer guarded in the same way, but open in a way that felt unfamiliar, like he was finally seeing me without the filters he had built, without the narrative he had accepted so easily before. "So that is it?" he asked, his voice low, careful, like he was stepping through something unstable. "You just walk away after all of this?" I let the question sit for a moment, not because I needed time to answer, but because it deserved to exist in the space between us, to be understood for what it really was. Not a demand, not an accusation, but a reflection of something that had changed too quickly for him to fully process. "No," I said quietly, "this is not where it ends." and I saw the tension return to his posture. Not defensive this time, but alert, like he was bracing for something else, something he could not yet see. Vanessa shifted again behind him, her voice quieter now, less certain. "What does that mean?" she asked. And I turned slightly, meeting her gaze without resistance, without hostility, just clarity. "It means that tonight was never the conclusion," I said. "It was just the moment everything became visible. And the weight of that settled differently than anything before, because it pointed forward, not backward, toward consequences that had not yet unfolded." Daniel's father spoke again, his tone measured but no longer authoritative. "Are you saying there will be action taken?" he asked, and I nodded once, not dramatically, not as a threat, just as a confirmation of process. "There already has been," I replied, and I saw the ripple move through the room again, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. The realization that what they were standing in was not hypothetical, not potential, but active, ongoing, real. Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes dropping briefly before returning to mine. "And you stayed?" he said, more to himself than to me. "You stayed through all of this," and I understood what he was asking, not just about time, but about intention, about whether any part of what we had shared had been separate from everything else. "I stayed because I needed to understand," I said, my voice steady, not defensive, not apologetic, not just the structure, not just the connections, but you. And that truth landed differently, softer but no less significant, because it acknowledged something real without changing the outcome. Vanessa let out a small breath, almost a whisper. "That does not make it better." And I looked at her, not dismissing her, not correcting her, just acknowledging the perspective she held. "No," I said, "it does not, because not every truth exists to comfort. Some exist only to clarify." Judge Whitman remained near, his presence steady, but he did not intervene, did not guide the moment, because this part did not belong to the process anymore. It belonged to the aftermath, to the human side of something that had started as procedure and ended as something far more personal. Daniel stepped slightly to the side, creating space between us without fully turning away, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "I thought I knew exactly who you were," he said, and there was no accusation in it, just a statement, a realization, and I nodded once, understanding that feeling more than he realized. "You knew what I chose to show you," I replied, "and I knew what you did not realize you were part of, and that was the truth in its simplest form. Not a contradiction, not a deception, just two different perspectives intersecting in a way neither of us had fully anticipated." The room remained still, but the energy had shifted again, no longer tense in the same way, no longer reactive, but heavy with consequence, with the understanding that whatever had been revealed could not be undone, could not be reinterpreted into something easier, something more comfortable. Daniel's mother spoke softly now, her voice no longer controlled, no longer structured, but human, uncertain. "What happens to us?" she asked. And for the first time, the question was not about me, not about Daniel, but about all of them, about the family, the structure, the life they had built around something they were only now beginning to question. I looked at her, at all of them, and I chose my words carefully, not to soften them, not to protect them, but to give them exactly what was true. "That depends on what the review finds," I said, "and what you choose to do when you understand it." And that answer did not satisfy, did not resolve, but it was the only one that mattered, because it placed the outcome where it belonged, not in assumptions, not in fear, but in truth. Daniel nodded again, slower this time, absorbing it, not accepting it fully, but no longer resisting it either. And in that moment, I saw something shift in him, not a collapse, not a failure, but an awareness, the kind that changes how a person sees everything moving forward. I reached for the folder again, closing it fully this time, not as an ending, but as a transition, because this moment, this room, this night had already served its purpose. It had revealed what needed to be revealed, shifted what needed to be shifted, and what came next would not happen here, not in front of an audience, not in a space built for celebration. I took a step back, not retreating, not escaping, just moving forward into the next part of something that had already begun long before this night. And as I looked at Daniel one last time, there was no anger, no regret, just clarity, the kind that comes when everything has finally been seen for what it truly is. And then I turned, not waiting for permission, not waiting for response, because some moments do not need closure in words. They need action, they need movement, they need the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what comes next, even if no one else in the room does. And as I walked away, I knew one thing without question. This was not the end of the story, not for me, not for them, but it was the moment everything changed, the moment nothing could ever go back to what it was before, and sometimes that is the only kind of ending that matters. It has been 3 months since that night, and the silence I remember most is not the one from the room, but the one that came after. The quiet mornings where no one was watching me, no one was judging me, no one was trying to define who I was or what I should be. I moved out of that world completely, not because I was running, but because I finally understood that I did not belong in a place where I had to constantly prove my worth to people who had already decided who I was without asking. And for the first time in a long time, my life felt steady, not perfect, not easy, but clear in a way it had never been before. The investigation continued exactly as it was supposed to. Methodical, structured, detached from emotion, and I did my job the way I always had, with precision, with discipline. But this time, there was something different inside me, something quieter, something more grounded, because I was no longer carrying the weight of trying to be understood by people who were never really listening. I heard things about Daniel later, not directly from him, but through the quiet channels that exist in professional circles, fragments of information, adjustments being made, questions being asked. A life that had once felt so certain now moving through a process it could not control. And I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. I just felt distance, the kind that comes when something has already ended, long before anyone says it out loud. And Vanessa, she disappeared from my world entirely, not because she chose to leave, but because people like her only exist in environments where perception matters more than truth. And once that illusion breaks, there is nothing left for them to hold on to. But the most important change was not them. It was me. It was the way I started listening to myself again, the way I stopped ignoring the quiet voice inside me that had always known something was not right, the way I began to trust that voice instead of silencing it just to keep the peace or to hold on to something that was already slipping away. I learned that night that boundaries are not something you explain to people. They are something you live. Something you enforce quietly, consistently, without apology, and that self-respect is not about how others see you. It is about what you refuse to accept, even when it would be easier to stay silent. I learned that love, real love, does not ask you to shrink yourself, to hide parts of who you are, or to ignore what you feel just to keep someone else comfortable. And if it does, then it is not love. It is something else entirely. And maybe if you are listening to this right now, maybe you have been in a room like that, not the same room, not the same situation, but a moment where you felt judged, misunderstood, reduced to something you knew you were not. And maybe you stayed quiet because it felt easier, because it felt safer, because you were afraid of what would happen if you spoke the truth. I want you to know that your silence does not make you wrong, but your truth still matters. And there will come a moment, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, where you will have to choose between staying in a space that diminishes you or stepping into one that reflects who you really are, and that choice will not be easy, but it will be worth it. Protect your peace, protect your finances, protect your energy, and do not ignore the signs that something is off just because you want it to be right, because the cost of ignoring your instincts is always higher than the discomfort of facing the truth. I believe, in my own way, that there is something greater guiding us, whether you call it God, the universe, or simply intuition, something that nudges us, warns us, redirects us. And that night, I finally listened, not just to the facts, not just to the process, but to that deeper sense that something was not aligned, and choosing to follow it changed everything. So if you are in that place right now, if something inside you feels unsettled, listen to it, trust it, because it is not there to confuse you, it is there to protect you. Thank you for being here, for listening, for sharing this moment with me. because stories like this are not just about what happened. They are about connection, about understanding that none of us are as alone as we think we are, and if even one part of this resonated with you, then maybe it served its purpose. And if you feel comfortable, share where you are listening from, your city, your country, your time, because I would love to know who is out there, who is walking through their own version of this story. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this: never let someone else define your value when you already know your truth.